In 2010, a woman was driving her car when she saw a man running down the road who appeared to be in distress. When the woman slowed down, this man collapsed, and so she called 911. They told her to go to the house nearby to see what was happening, and when she did, she came up on an incredibly gruesome scene. This is the Appomattox Massacre. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name's Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also taking cat naps. And by cat naps, I literally mean naps with my cat beside me. But anyway, today we're going over the case of a man who did something so shocking and demented that even the police were haunted by it. The town of Appomattox, Virginia, has a population of merely 2,000 or so people. It's a tight-knit rural community with a vast history where everybody knows everybody, or at least almost everybody. Christopher, aka Chris Brian Speight, was born in 1970 to his parents Susan and Peter. He grew up in Concord, which is a little village on the line between Campbell and Appomattox counties. Shortly after his younger sister, Laura Lee, was born in 1972, Chris's father, Peter, left the family and was never seen again. Meanwhile, his mother, Susan, was left as a single mom to her two kids. Susan was a school teacher at a nearby middle school, and by 1988, Chris, his mother, and his little sister all lived in a two-bedroom, $300 a month apartment. In his early 20s, Chris got a job stocking the bar at a restaurant in Lynchburg, and according to the owner of the restaurant, Chris was a bit unusual. He was apparently obsessed with government conspiracies and weapons, and sometimes he even brought his BB gun to work and used it to pop balloons after the restaurant had parties. He was also really quiet and seemed to be somewhat reclusive. Now, at one point, Chris thought he had an agreement with his boss to begin doing security for the restaurant, and in the process, he would have to begin handling large amounts of cash at night. Because of this, he filed an application for a concealed weapons permit. On the application, Chris wrote, "I am a dependable, hard-working person, not quick to anger, and find ways to get out of problems without using force or violence. For many years, my hobby has been firearms, and I take seriously the responsibility of handling them." In hindsight, this statement would prove to be quite ominous. But one interesting thing the owner of the restaurant did mention about Chris was that it appeared as if he had some form of menacing inner voice telling him to do things. And at that early point in his life, Chris would have had no reason to put on some type of strange act or anything, so I think it's important to mention this little detail. Nevertheless, despite all of the things we just mentioned, Chris was never really known for being a violent or angry person, and over the next 2 decades, there were no strong indications that he was a threatening person. Chris never had a criminal record or even as much as a speeding ticket. As an adult, he continued his hobby of collecting firearms, and as the years passed, he went through a few different jobs before ultimately finding employment at a supermarket in Lynchburg. Chris worked as a security guard there and was seen as a somewhat normal guy. But then something happened that put him on a downward spiral, and that was the death of his mother, Susan. Susan died in December of 2006 due to an aggressive form of brain cancer, and for a period of time, Chris slipped into a deep depression. Before long, he temporarily moved in with his sister, Laura Lee, and her family in Marietta, Georgia. During one incident, Chris ran off unexpectedly, and for a few days, they had to chase him down and find him. It turned out that he was staying in a motel on the side of the highway. Now, it's unclear whether or not Chris was put in some form of psychiatric hold or anything after this incident, but whatever it was some form of mental breakdown and a sign of things to come. But after living with his sister's family for a while, he eventually moved back to Virginia to live in rural Appomattox. Chris moved here around 2008 and took up residence in a brown colonial-style house. The house and its connecting property had been deeded to him and his sister following the death of their mother. As you can see by this picture, it was a really nice-looking house, and their surrounding property included 34 acres. Chris absolutely loved it. Because it was so rural and filled with so much open space, he was able to shoot his guns here as much as he wanted. Neighbors said that hearing him shoot his guns outside was a regular occurrence. Additionally, Chris took extremely good care of the lawn, and he planted bushes out front and kept track of weed overgrowth and stuff like that. Considering how sort of introverted and lone wolfish that he was, it seemed perfect. In many ways, the time Chris spent alone here, which was about a year, was extremely rejuvenating for him and kicked him out of his depression. The only problem was that there was a bit of a legal situation going on with the place. Because they didn't think Chris was capable of looking after the home himself, Laura Lee and her family moved into the home with him during the spring of 2009. There were also steps taken to temporarily remove Chris as a trustee for the property, considering his mental issues. And unfortunately, this was going to cause some trouble. But if you notice, I said that this was supposed to be temporary, so keep that in mind. Now, to give you some background, from an early age, Chris was always extremely close with his sister, Laura Lee. They were like two peas in a pod. And some family members said they looked a lot alike when they were young. But the difference between the pair was that by adulthood, Laura Lee had built a strong foundation for herself. She was a little over 2 years younger than Chris, at age 37, and happily married with kids. Her husband's name was Dwayne Speight, and together they made the perfect couple. Dwayne had previously been in the Navy, and he served as a gunner on the USS Wisconsin in Operation Desert Storm, but at that point, he was a family man. Back in Georgia, Dwayne had a construction business, and by 2009 through 2010, he was in the process of starting a new business in Virginia with the help of his two brothers. As for Laura Lee, she was a graduate of the University of Lynchburg and a mother. Both Laura Lee and Dwayne were really good, loving parents. Laura Lee was known for being very warm, caring, and responsible, while Dwayne was known as dependable, hardworking, and dedicated. The couple's kids were Morgan Dobbins and Joshua Speight. Morgan was a 15-year-old high schooler from Laura Lee's previous marriage. She was really fond of baking and even planned to begin taking culinary classes at school the following year. Meanwhile, Joshua was an adorable 4-year-old boy who loved riding his bike. He had a smile that lit up the whole room. Overall, the 4-person family was very tight-knit and close and loving. But unfortunately, evil doesn't care about innocence or love. It only cares about itself. Now, in the beginning, though, everything seemed to work out. For the first couple months that the Sipes/Dobbins family moved in, there were no major issues. In fact, Chris and his sister's family got along quite well. But then Chris became misinformed regarding the legal situation involving the house. To him, it seemed as if his sister and her husband were simply trying to take the house and property away from him and kick him out. Of course, the truth was that while Chris was removed as a trustee for the property due to his mental troubles, this was a temporary thing until he got his stuff together. According to Laura Lee's lawyer, the plan was actually to sacrifice her ownership of the deed to her brother, so he would eventually have full ownership of the home and property. It was actually a quite selfless measure, and only a week before all of this took place, Laura Lee had talked to the lawyer about signing the papers over. But the way Chris saw the whole ordeal was as if they were just kicking him out to live on the street. So in the days leading up to January of 2010, subtle signs emerged that something was wrong with him. Coworkers at the grocery store where he worked as a security guard noticed changes in his behavior. He became unusually withdrawn, speaking less and keeping to himself more than usual. His demeanor shifted. He seemed agitated, restless, as if something was weighing heavily on his mind. Chris was even pacing back and forth so much at his job that coworkers joked that he was going to accidentally dig a trench through the middle of the store. One coworker, a cashier named Tanya, was quoted as saying, "On Saturday, he was here, and he wouldn't come inside. He wouldn't talk to anybody. We joked that he was going to shoot someone." Now, as for what was actually going on in his head, only Chris knows. But he later claimed that around this time period, he was hearing voices that were telling him things. More specifically, that an Egyptian goddess was whispering in his ear, telling him that his loved ones were demons and that he should kill them. Chris even said the goddess had a name, and that name was, of course, none other than Jennifer? Which definitely sounds like the name of an Egyptian goddess if I've ever heard one before. But anyway, Chris's spiraling into psychosis was soon going to result in a series of extremely cruel and evil actions. Neighbors claimed in the days leading up to what would happen, Chris began shooting his guns more and more outside, and they would even hear him shooting at night sometimes, which he didn't really do before. And ultimately, Chris was going to do even more damage than he originally planned. Now, even to this day, it's unclear the exact timeline or events of January 17th of 2010. The only thing we know for sure is that at some point that day, Chris grabbed a high-powered rifle and shot 3 of the family members he lived with one by one. This included his sister, Laura Lee Speight, her husband, Dwayne, and even the 4-year-old boy, Joshua. Laura Lee and Dwayne were found in the living room, while Joshua was found at the top of the steps. For the next 2 days, Chris would then lurk either in or around the house. His whereabouts during this time period aren't precisely documented, but we do know he never left the property. So there's either 2 possibilities. The first possibility involves Chris staying in the house next to his dead family members' remains, meaning he would have gone to sleep, woken up, and maybe even eaten breakfast in the same house. Not the same room necessarily, but the same house. The second possibility involves Chris just lurking around the outside of the house, maybe sleeping in the nearby treehouse or the woods or something. The first possibility is far more terrifying and maybe even more likely, considering that police later found a bunch of booby traps and homemade explosives inside the home. Meanwhile, following the killings, he was 100% active inside the home. There's also no reports of any neighbors seeing him outside, and he didn't show up for work. So yeah, whatever happened, it's sickening. But anyway, 2 days after the murders of the Speights, Laura Lee's 15-year-old daughter, Morgan, who had been spending the night over her friend's house, was soon on her way back home in the front seat of her friend's mother's car. Morgan's friend was named Emily Quarles, and Emily was 15 and known as a talented singer and a great student. She and Morgan knew each other from school, and they were basically inseparable. After spending the night over Emily's mother Karen drove Morgan home, and Emily came along for the ride. But little did they all realize that back at the home on Snaps Mill Road, somebody was waiting for them. After pulling up to the house, Morgan and Karen both got out of the car and walked up to the porch together. Karen was a family friend, so perhaps she wanted to chat with the Speights or something. Who knows? Meanwhile, according to Chris's own account, as he sat waiting up in a treehouse with a loaded rifle, he heard the Egyptian goddess Jennifer in his head telling him that the people who had arrived were there to help the victims inside the house. But this created a bit of a problem for Chris because Jennifer also told him that unless the victims' bodies were allowed to rot undisturbed, they would also be used by demons. It's unclear exactly what was going on in Chris's head, but Morgan and Karen were the 2 who went up to the porch while Emily stayed behind in the car. Shortly after walking up, shots rang out from a treehouse situated near the home. Then, within minutes, all 3 of the people we just mentioned were killed. Hours later, Jonathan, Karen's husband and Emily's father, and Beau, Emily's boyfriend, grew anxious as neither Karen nor Emily had returned home or answered their calls. Now at the time, Emily's 16-year-old boyfriend had just been dropped off at the Quarles house to hang out with her. As Jonathan and Bo were waiting for their respective partners to come home, they eventually decided to drive up to the Speight house themselves. But when they got there, they were set to meet the same fate as those before them. After killing Morgan, Emily, and Karen, Chris had remained inside of the treehouse, likely expecting more people to arrive. So when Jonathan and Bo pulled up in the driveway, Chris once again got ready to fire his weapon. After Jonathan and Bo exited the car, Bo was hit first and died. But Jonathan, despite being shot, managed to begin running out to the road. Somehow he even managed to escape Chris's line of sight. But as Jonathan was running down the road trying to survive, he collapsed to the ground due to blood loss and his internal injuries. Meanwhile, one of the neighbors, a woman by the name of Tammy, was casually passing through in her car when she witnessed Jonathan on the side of the road. The time was around noon by then, and at first Tammy thought that Jonathan was drunk because he was just sort of stumbling and weak and falling over. But when she realized what actually happened, she immediately slowed down her car next to him and pulled over. After getting out, Tammy ran up to Jonathan and saw him fighting for his life, so quickly she pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. Over the phone, the operator asked her to walk up to the house nearby and get a better look at the situation. As Tammy slowly made her way up the driveway of the house, she originally planned to knock on the door, but that was before she encountered a horrifying sight. Towards the beginning of the driveway, there was a car, and lying next to the passenger side of the car was the lifeless body of a teenager, or Bo. When Tammy told the dispatcher what she was seeing, the dispatcher told her to get back to her car immediately. Afterwards, Tammy ran back up the street and got into her vehicle as fast as she could. Meanwhile, despite all of the carnage that had already taken place, Chris was not going to go down without a fight. At some point, Chris dropped down from the treehouse and went back inside of the home. Minutes later, police arrived at the scene, and as the cars started piling up into the driveway, the situation escalated. From the second-story window inside the house, Chris fired his rifle at one of the police cars. Luckily, he didn't manage to injure anyone, but over the next 18 hours, there would be an intense standoff. Soon after shooting the police car, Chris ran out of the home and into the nearby woods. At one point, a few hours into the standoff, Chris actually shot and hit a police helicopter, forcing the pilot to make an emergency landing. The pilot, whose name was Sergeant Don Childs, ultimately ended up surviving, but it was the closest call of his entire career. Eventually, as many as 100 police officers were dispatched to help with the standoff. This involved all types of different units, including canine officers, and as the hours passed, the situation became more and more dangerous. The police set up a perimeter and began searching for Chris, but by nightfall, this became a little challenging. With the help of canine units and night vision equipment, they continued their search and expanded the perimeter. The search ended up lasting until the following morning, and at 6 a.m., police finally located Chris's whereabouts. Then, by the 18-hour mark, it must have become clear to Chris that his efforts to resist were pointless. At approximately 7:30 a.m. on January 20th of 2010, he surrendered to police with his hands up, and he was soon placed in the back of a police car. When the bomb squad raided Chris's farmhouse, they found several booby traps and as many as 43 homemade explosives and fuses. They also found multiple rounds of ammunition, rifles, and a 9mm handgun. Meanwhile, during Chris's interrogation, interrogators tried to uncover the truth behind what exactly happened here, but Chris made a bunch of unusual statements that made no sense. When the interrogator asked him, for example, why he did this and what was going through his head, Chris said, "I mean, when somebody can read your thoughts, they can do stuff to your heart, man. What I'm gonna tell you will horrify you beyond your imagination." After that, the interrogator wanted to know why Chris killed 5 more people after killing the first 3. While Chris was giving his answer, the interrogator interjected, "You didn't want anybody to help them, that's what you're saying." To which Chris replied, "Yes, anybody that's connected to that is unclean and should be slaughtered. They're supposed to be picked by the birds. They're unclean." Now, despite all of Chris's unusual claims, For a period of time after this horrifying event, there were some real questions whether or not Chris was telling the truth about the alleged voices in his head. In fact, some of the family members during the trial accused him of outright lying and using that as an excuse for an insanity plea. One family member was quoted in court as saying, "You knew exactly what you were doing. There is no Egyptian goddess Jennifer. There are no demons." Now, to be entirely honest with you, I don't know the truth, but following a mental evaluation from two separate psychiatrists, they each found Chris to be clinically insane and diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. And clearly the judge agreed, which is why 5 months after Chris's arrest, he was sent to a psychiatric institution. But once Chris finally went back to trial in 2013, he was officially convicted of 8 counts of capital murder and sentenced to 5 life terms in prison. So, good riddance to him. But nothing will ever take back what happened. The families Christopher Speight brutally killed were really just normal, good, hard-working people. Like any average people you would meet on the street. Laura Lee Sipe, Dwayne Sipe, Morgan Dobbins, and Joshua Sipe were very involved in the community and went to church every weekend. They were also known as very generous. As we mentioned earlier, only a week before their deaths, they had prepared to literally gift the entire property to Chris. It's genuinely a shame that he didn't realize this. But another horrifying part is that he killed people who weren't even involved in any of the debate over the house ownership. The Quarles were just friends with the Sipes. Karen was a longtime respiratory therapist, while Jonathan was a self-employed landscaper. According to their friends, the Quarles came into a local restaurant pretty frequently, and the workers there always knew what Jonathan and Karen wanted, which was a grilled chicken salad with ranch dressing for him and the cheesy Western Plus fries for her. And less than a week before his untimely death, another close friend claimed that Jonathan specifically had stopped by to help them bring in some heavy rugs into their house. That was just the type of guy he was. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Karen's daughter, Emily Quarles, was also extremely well-liked and had more friends than she knew what to do with. She was a freshman in high school and a devoted Christian. As for her boyfriend, Beau, well, according to everybody, he was a really good kid. His full name was Ronald Irvie Scruggs, aka Beau, and he was a junior in high school. He liked playing Guitar Hero, hanging out with friends, skateboarding, and deer hunting. And his mother always wanted him to cut his hair, but he liked to keep it long, which I can relate to. So rest in peace to him, and rest in peace to both families. May their memories live on.